Okay, everybody, thanks for joining me. This is the R Geremia show, and I'm very happy that this is going to be the first guest of this particular podcast, this iteration of a previous show that I did under a different name, but this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have Paul Levy here. Paul.
Hey there, Adam.
Hey.
Nice to meet you.
Fantastic to meet you. Let me get my volume all turned up here.
Get my speaker view. Okay, great.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, it's so nice to meet you, and thank you so much for the skin products. Really appreciate that.
Oh, you're talking about the Targi Botanical Complete Skin Repair?
Yeah. No, I'm really liking it, and so because I've been having this intense rash, so I just really appreciate it.
Wonderful, man. That's so good to hear. I'm glad it's working for you. Yeah, Lindsay and I make that product for those of you in the audience who don't know. It's one of our passion projects. So I'm glad we sent some to Paul. But Paul, this is the first time that you and I have ever actually got to communicate or meet each other.
Right.
We have mutual friends, some very potent, wonderful people that we love, that we share in common, that we get to talk to. And so it's great to talk to you for the first time live on the R Geremia show. And you'll be the very first guest of this particular podcast series that we're doing. So,
welcome. Wow, that's awesome. I feel really honored. So thank you so much for the invite.
Excellent. So we're all celebrating your new book, the Undreaming Wetiko book, Breaking the Spell of the Nightmare Virus. What a great name, by the way, I want to say.
Yeah. And not just the nightmare virus, the nightmare, it's a mind virus.
Absolutely. That's the thing. It probably left that part out of my brain on purpose. It got in there and is trying to trick me into saying things. They call them Freudian slips, right? But they're also, that's the interesting part about this is the fact that, cutting straight to the chase, a lot of people don't know the name Wetiko, but let's just say that it's evil. Let's just cut straight to the chase. You can call it many different things, but it's a way of interpreting the actions of what we have been historically calling evil since the beginning of time. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's only half of it though, because it's a quantum phenomena, this mind virus, this Wetiko mind virus, and it's the source of the most incredible, evil, not just personal evil, but archetypal evil, but encoded, hidden within the mind virus, it's also helping us, potentially catalyzing our awakening and our evolution as a species. That's what I mean, that it's a quantum phenomena. There's like a superposition of states of both this incredible evil or this amazing medicine. It's like it contains its own vaccine. Mm-hmm. And not only does it cure itself potentially, but it actually is offering us a gift. It's expanding our consciousness and opening our hearts. But if we don't recognize its benefits, its gifts, then it just assumes its programmed function to kill us. So that's what we're dealing with. I mean, really.
Yeah, and that's scary for those of you that are hearing this. What? Something out there is trying to kill us? Well, I mean, if you look at it, people who don't think correctly, who have inverted values, are trying to hurt people every day, so what is the cause that makes somebody who was an innocent baby, at one point decide to break bad or to go down the path of evil when they had ultimate potential, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of ways of going with this, but like one thing that comes up, it's not just that our species is asleep and we need to be awakened, but it's as if, based on evidence, that there's some sort of malevolent force that's invested in keeping us asleep. Mm-hmm. And it does it through the unconscious, through the psyche. And even in psychology, like Freud, name there's this death instinct that's just wanting to just, kind of deconstruct and decompose everything. And then, in the work with Jung, he talks about there's this morbid, that's his phrase, part of the personality which has a will to be ill. Perversely, it gets off on just staying stuck and staying sick. And I think it's really, really important to, instead of just being all love and light and let's us all focus on the light, and then we're avoiding relationship with half of reality and our own darker side, to like, my whole work is trying to shed light on, yeah, what is that in us? It seems like, like a variable, like a factor in the equation of the universe that exists in the non-local field. What is that in us that's actually seemingly actively opposed to us awakening? And I'm
Mhm.
like, trying to shed light on that. And this isn't just an abstract philosophical question, but this really, it brings up like, you know, I'm pointing out, well, the real medicine for dealing with this mind virus is to connect with who we are, is to express ourselves creatively, because our
Mhm.
nature is creative. And so many people are like, oh, I feel I want to be creative, but I'm stuck, I'm blocked. And I'm like, okay, great. What's happening right there? What's your experience right at that edge? That's, so that all of a sudden takes it down from an abstract idea to a real experience that all of us have.
How the rubber meets the road in this, like how does it actually interface with us in our lives, which is unique because many of us have figured out that no good deed goes unpunished, right? That whole thing, especially when you're doing something ambitious and of light, and visionary forces of dark seem to come and try to derail it every time. And I
Right.
experienced that, and people in my life would say that it has to do with me. It's, oh, fucking Adam, it's always you. Something always goes wrong when you're doing something or whatever it is. But I realize a lot of people don't try. They stay in a little safe cubicle of life where they don't really let too much light and ambition out into their outward expression. And therefore, they don't get a lot of feedback or pushback, right? Wouldn't you say?
Right. Well, there's a couple things that I want to point out. Like, one is, what I've learned from my own experience is that the closer I get to my light, or to the light, or to myself, or to creatively expressing myself, the more the darker forces seem to get activated that are trying to stop me, whether they're inside of my mind or out in the world. And I've learned, instead of interpreting that as, evidence of how screwed up I am, it's like, no, that's evidence of that I'm on the right path. Of
Mhm.
course, that's their function. It's showing that I'm actually approaching the light. So all of a sudden, that reframe really, really helps me. But then what you just said, when your friends were saying, oh, Adam, this always happens to you, and you're so screwed up and whatever, you know, um, the greatest work, like, so Answer to Job is, in my mind, the greatest work of Jung. And I have a chapter in the new book on Answer to Job. And what he points out was that, so here Job, was a God-fearing man and was all wealthy and successful. And then all of a sudden, all these calamities happened,
Mhm.
and his whole world fell apart like he was having a nightmare. And all of his friends, in the book of Job, they're called like comforters. All of his comforters were like blaming Job. Oh, you must have done something wrong, and yours is so screwed up, just like people were like doing with you. And what Jung points out is that what he wrote in Answer to Job is that, no, Job didn't agree with that. He knew he was innocent, that, and he actually began to recognize there was a transpersonal origin of all the calamities, of all the nightmare that was befalling him. And that awareness created, in a way, the circumstance for him to have a revelation. In other words, so not personalizing it, not taking on the guilt. And because the comforters, our friends, our relatives, are so quick to just like to judge the other person and put it back on them. And
Yeah.
just the idea that what happens, what befalls us, that the origin, the source of it might actually be transpersonal.
Yeah.
That
And what
that's
do
a
you mean by transpersonal for the people in my
Yeah,
audience who I know that
yeah.
term?
So transpersonal, so not just having to do with with your personal process, but by transpersonal, an easy way to think of it is higher dimensional,
Hmm.
almost like the origin of it is spirit or of God, or archetypal, like a deeper patterning that's
Hmm.
coming through, that it doesn't just have to do with your personal process.
Hmm.
Okay.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah, so it's not just an opportunity to be a victim, but there's a system at play where all the parts aren't separate, and it's kind of what ties into the quantum thing, which is so awesome that you can bridge these two worlds together, because it's not a seemingly objective universe out there that's giving something to you or taking something away. In some ways that we're either inviting this evil or this Wetiko into our lives and we're entertaining it or fighting with it, or we're dispelling it. And that's why I think the work that you're doing is of the utmost importance, because we can identify when all of this stuff happens where people feel that it's a time bomb set to random. You know, how
Yeah.
how do you diffuse wing nuts that, like, maybe don't bring Uncle Eddie when he's drunk to the meditation. That's the way you can dispel Wetiko in a practical aspect of things, about making smart choices. But what do you think is the most effective way to essentially break this spell of the nightmare mind virus?
Yeah. No, totally. Well, I mean, on the one hand, just to have the recognition of our circumstance that it's as totally as if we're under a spell. It's like we're under a fairy tale and our species has fallen asleep, like as if we've fallen under a curse or a spell. So I think on the one hand, it's important to get that into focus. And then the question is, oh, okay, how do we break that spell? And in a sense, this is what my whole work is about, so, and there are, I could write a book about that, how to answer that question, because like on the one hand, people can hear about this Wetiko mind virus and it sounds really out there and woo-woo and new agey and crazy. But keep in mind, and I'm happy to talk about this, is that every spiritual tradition is pointing out this mind virus in different ways. And so many visionaries and creative artists and philosophers and thinkers are all pointing at it. And so it's not just something, it's not a theory, it's not just something abstract. I mean, one way to understand, to bring it down to earth, is that what I mean by a mind virus is that the source and the solution of our collective madness is to be found within the psyche. And that's a no-brainer. Where else could it ever be found? That's what I mean by a mind virus. So the idea is to introspect, because what Wetiko does, it distracts us by thinking the problem is outside of us. And we put our attention outside of us, and then it has us, because no, the actual source of the problem is within us, is within our psyche. So the idea, developing some sort of self-reflective awareness, or whatever spiritual practice where we're like contemplating our process or our mind, our reactions, that can, and I can say a lot more about that, that can incredibly help. But then what the mind virus does, you see, I'll just explain in essence the very simple way of understanding it. So in the apocryphal texts, which, back in the day, they were the most sacred teachings. And then, now they're seen as, oh, they're not quite good enough to be in the canon in the actual Bible, but the actual opposite was the truth. They were like such potentiating sacred teachings that, they were kept separate and secret. And in the apocryphal text, they talk about Wetiko. And precisely word for word, they call it the counterfeiting spirit. So you see, the thing about Wetiko, it has no creativity at all, but it plugs into our creativity and turns it against us. And so what this counterfeiting spirit does, it puts us on, which means like it fools us, but also putting us on like a suit of clothes. It'll offer us a fictitious, limited version of ourselves. Oh, you're limited, you're wounded, you're traumatized, you're not awake. And it very, very convincing display. And if we're not awake in that moment, we will then identify with Wetiko's false version of ourselves. This is what Jung meant when he says the greatest danger facing our species is to identify with a fictitious identity. Absolutely. Now, interesting, this counterfeiting spirit was written, it was edited out of the Bible. And I point out that Wetiko was on the editorial board because it can't stand to be exposed. Because when you see it, you take away its power and you empower yourself. So if you think about what I'm describing, so here we've just gotten, if we've taken the bait, Wetiko has offered us this limited identity, we've identified with it, then it has us. Then it can manipulate and control us, because when we're in touch with our true nature, it has no power over us. But if
Absolutely.
we then identify with its false version, then think about what I'm describing. We actually, you see, Wetiko can't steal our soul, but it tricks us into giving our soul away. And
Wow.
then we identify with who we're not. And then we forget who we are and we disconnect from our creative power.
Mhm.
And that's a recipe for madness. That's Wetiko in a nutshell. So what I'm pointing out is that the way to dispel Wetiko is just to, infuse that process with awareness, is shed light, because we're actually colluding with it. That's the key thing. We are complicit in our own victimization.
Mhm.
And seeing through that, then all of a sudden, you're deepening your connection with yourself and you're unlocking your love and compassion and opening up your creativity and it's just there are endless benefits when you see that. But what Tico doesn't want us to do that, because then it would be rendered unemployed.
Mhm. Absolutely. Just like the fake news, who people want to deliberately tell lies to manipulate people, is a similar iteration of that. When we
Well,
believe
that's
things that
why.
aren't true. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that's why, like, what Wetiko does when somebody gets, because we all have Wetiko in potentiality. It exists in the collective unconscious. And but when we, get hooked by Wetiko or get infected sufficiently, and people can get taken over at any given moment and then unwittingly act out Wetiko into the world, and they've unwittingly offered themselves to be this vector or instrument for the mind virus to incarnate into our realm. um, the idea is when you get taken over by Wetiko sufficiently, you become like an automaton, you become like a robot, you
Hmm.
disconnect and there's no creativity that's programmed in, because
Yeah.
Wetiko is using your own creativity against you.
Yeah.
So that's why one of the key antidotes for Wetiko is to be in touch with your heart, to be
Hmm.
in touch with being a human being, which in indigenous cultures, that's like the highest praise when they say
Hmm.
somebody's become a human being. It's to be connected with your soul, with your love, and with your compassion. Because, think about what's happening, with AI or whatever. People are just becoming like kind of like almost like robots or something, or like actual robots are replacing humans. And
Hmm.
all of that is reflecting something about what I'm pointing at, the profundity of, just because even in the Bible, they talk about this mind blindness, and Christ will say, yeah, people have eyes but don't see, and he correlates that with a closed heart.
Yeah.
And we have a closed heart, a cold heart, that correlates to, like, that mind blindness. That is
Hmm.
what Tico. The idea is when you have that open heart, and when you meet people who have an open heart, like the good heart, that's what His Holiness Dalai Lama calls it. In Buddhism, they talk about what's called the precious bodhicitta, which is the most important thing. It's that good heart. It's the heart of awakening. And when you first begin doing practice, you're supposed to cultivate that good heart. And when you finally become enlightened, the prize you get is that good heart. It's the same. And that's why having that good heart of love and compassion, because that is our nature,
Hmm.
that love and compassion, that in a sense is the greatest protection against Wetiko. So there's nothing to be scared of when people hear about, oh, there's a mind virus and it's attacking us. No, the mind virus doesn't even exist. There's no such thing. It has no independent existence separate from our mind, and yet it can kill us. That's the paradox, And so, because Wetiko feeds off of fear. As soon as somebody gets afraid, oh, there's a mind virus, and no, then you've unwittingly offered yourself to be the superfood for Wetiko if you're identified with your fear, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I grew up, when my mother would call it the enemy or Satan, and I know a lot of people see it as the same, as a deceptive spirit that's always trying to mess with your mind, but doesn't come into your body and take you over, but can take over your thoughts. Uh, Implant fake news and lies and defeating scarcity into your operating system, how you see and view the world. Is that the same as how Wetiko would work in your
yeah,
ways?
that is, that idea of, in the Bible, Satan or the devil, those are personifications of the
Yeah.
Wetiko mind virus. Absolutely. Because think about Satan, the devil is the liar,
Hmm.
and diabolos is etymologically, it means that which separates.
Hmm.
And so all of a sudden, like in relationship, in community, in friendships, all of a sudden there'll be like a factor that gets into the relational field, and there'll be misunderstanding or feeling separation. And like Wetiko is behind the scenes, and it's being fed by
Hmm.
people. It can break up friendships and relationships. It's like a diabolical energy. And so, yeah, I point out in my work that, the devil and Satan and all of that. I mean, it's funny, the friend of mine who's reading the Audible book by recent two Wetiko books, and he's this Christian, sort of this minister. And when he was reading the books, for when people buy the audiobooks, he said to me, he goes, Paul, I cannot believe what's happening. As I'm reading your work, I'm being completely attacked by demons. And I just began laughing. And I was like, well, what do you think it was like to write the book? You
Yeah.
know? And it's an example that, yeah, this demonic energy, it doesn't want to be exposed.
Hmm.
And, just based on my own history of having gone through this incredible trauma, which was in essence an encounter with evil, and I've lived through it. And it almost killed me. It destroyed my entire family. It almost drove me crazy. And here I am cultivating an open heart, cultivating awareness. And I'm like creating a body of work, helping other people to shed light on this unconscious, shadowy, darker factor in the psyche that's at the bottom of the collective madness that we're playing out in the world. And of course, those darker forces are going to try to stop me. But like I've been saying, I've learned to just feel ecstatic when I feel them because, oh, great, I'm on the right path. How
Right.
fantastic.
Right. Instead of this is an indication of a flaw within
Right.
me, it shows that maybe, is there smoke where there's fire? And if you were living a life that was conducive to evil, then it wouldn't try to disrupt you. If you're doing something that would disrupt the evil, it's going to try to mess you up, but it doesn't have as much power as the light side of the force. And I want to say that Paul, thank you for writing these books, because I couldn't even imagine going through the last 5 years without being able to interpret it through the lens of Wetiko and your work. Because throughout so much of my life, I had experiences similar to yours, reading your books and hearing about your family Wetiko, or your fam mafia experiences, as you would sometimes call it. And mine is impeccably similar to that, but very different. But the best part about it is that the annealing process of getting humbled and pummeled with the unfavorable experience, right? Because if it was favorable and comfortable, we wouldn't really look behind the scenes and into this darkness that's not fun to look at, but in turn it has to be looked at, and you have to go through the dark, the shamanic sense from dark to light. So thank you for helping build some kind of a framework that's not in conflict with religion, even though people who look at it from the outside might say, oh, no, I just call for Christ to, and I do too, Christos the light. But this is like a practical roadmap for how to identify the thorns in your heart.
Yeah. No, totally. I appreciate that. And for me, as I found my voice, you see, I was in such a deep process of encountering, having a close encounter of the Wetiko kind of encountering evil. And like I said, it almost destroyed my life. And then I was fortunate to find my voice and, find my inner voice, my creative voice. And that's what informed my books and my teachings and stuff like that. And the thing which is cool is that the actual act of creatively expressing what I've done in the books, not only is it thankfully helping people and medicine for people, but it was helping me because as I was articulating these experiences I was having, it was deepening my own understanding and realization of what I was writing about. And that's why I'm still writing because and that's why the importance of being creative, because being creative is plugging into that energy that would fuel the mind virus and its negative effects. and it's like rechanneling it and transmuting it into something, that's medicine.
Hmm. I love that. And that's what, man, it's so up right now. A lot of us have been deplatformed from social media over the last 5 years for saying anything outside of the official narratives, right?
Right.
And it seems like the ultimate cancel culture would be the same force. It doesn't want the truth. It doesn't want truth and right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is, when Wetiko is in the field, or in the room, or however you say it, it's not safe to speak.
Mm,
If you actually express yourself or speak truth or shed light on the lies or the darkness, you'll get censored, you'll get deplatformed,
mhm.
demonetized. And so what happens is that when we live in a world where that's the case, that becomes internalized inside of our mind, and then it gets pushed down into the unconscious, so it becomes chronic. So then we become our own control system, and we then unconsciously shut down our own creative expression. See, that's the real danger. And then by doing that, because the greatest poison in the human psyche is repressed and unexpressed creativity. And by doing that, we're like actually creating poison in ourselves. So that's
Yeah.
why the importance of us creatively stepping up and speaking our voice in whatever way. Like I'm doing it in my own way. And the thing which is cool is that, the powers that be, it's like off their radar. They're not, they just, oh, a mind virus, that's whatever, they're not threatened by me in the normal way, where if I were like pointing out, certain more specific stuff that's happening in the world around whatever, fill in the blank. And so, I feel like, no, I'm offering this particular, this medicine that, certain people aren't ready for it, and they just think, oh, I don't relate, and this sounds kind of new agey, crazy, woo-woo. But so many people, I mean, every day I get emails from people around the world who are like, oh my God, thank you. I'm so ecstatic I found your work. It's helping me so much. And then what happens? They get the transmission, or they get psychoactivated in their psyche, and then it becomes contagious.
Yeah.
Then when people are embodying the realization, because the realization is really like, this is a collectively shared dream, and I can talk more about that, that can go viral, just like, supposedly COVID can go viral and is contagious.
Yeah.
Well, this mind virus, the positive aspect, can go viral, because Jung himself says, he goes, in times of collective psychosis, and that's what Wetiko is, it's a collective psychosis. He goes, the only thing that can save us is a new symbolic idea. That's
Yeah.
a, and that's what Wetiko is. Because the one thing, think about it, these great tyrants, in history, the one thing they were most afraid of was an idea whose time has come.
Indeed.
And Wetiko is exactly that.
Yeah, that is. And the thing that's cool about this is it's not just identifying the enemy in ways that fundamentalists have. And, for example, with the Inquisitions, just were brutal in the name of God, right? In the name of light, they were literally acting out evil and thinking that they were somehow dispelling the evil, but they became the evil that they were trying to fight out there. So the thing I love about what your work does is that it's not about necessarily eliminating evil in the world, but essentially seeing that you have that potential within yourself to be a hero or basically demonic, every single person, and it's all a choice by deliberate will. We're voting every breath, every moment, every thought, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I think is so
Yeah.
beautiful.
That's exactly right. No, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because like the typical fundamentalist, there's a split in their psyche between the light and the dark, and they're identified with the light and project the shadow outside of
Yeah,
themselves. And that, dynamic of scapegoating, of shadow projecting, that is the underlying psychological dynamic of Wetiko. Because, think about it in a dream. If I'm, split off from my own darkness, right? Well, then what happens? Once I'm disassociated from it, I project it out. It literally will get dreamed up in the dream. Somebody or people, group of people, whatever, will come into the dream, and they'll be the carrier of my projection. I will see them as embodying evil. And then what happens when I amplify that process? I ultimately try to destroy them, which is just an outer externalized, sort of dramatization of my own initial internal process of wanting to like exterminate my own darkness. Now I'm actually unconsciously acting out my inner process in the outer world. And by trying to destroy them because I think they're evil, I'm actually unwittingly possessed by the very evil I'm trying to destroy. And that's Wetiko,
Yeah.
and so the idea is like in my work, I'm trying to say, no, 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 if we see somebody as, oh, they're like taken over by Wetiko and they're like embodying evil, the key thing is to recognize, wait a second, and they're a dream character. They're an embodied reflection of that part of me that's in the dark. And then all of a sudden, I'm not like seeing through the lens of the separate self, because Wetiko is, one way of describing it, it is being identified with the separate self. And when there's separate self, when I'm a separate self, separate from you, you're an other. And if you're an other, then there's fear, and fear is the superfood for Wetiko. So the idea is to see through that imagination of the separate self, to have the recognition, oh, not only is that person reflecting my own darkness, but in a way they're getting dreamed up. We're all collaboratively dreaming each other up to pick up the very roles we're enacting. And to see through that illusion of the separate self is to recognize, oh, we're actually parts of one another. We're interconnected, interdependent parts of one another. The energetic expression of that realization is compassion.
Yeah.
And that's, in a way, the Wetiko sort of dissolver par excellence is that sense of empathic, loving compassion, because then you're not trying to destroy the other person and you're not concretizing them as being evil, feeling identified. I'm on the side of light and I'm all good. That's who's the one who's insane then? It's you. You see, when I see somebody, and they're like enacting Wetiko or evil, and I think, oh, that's who they are, and that's separate from me. That point of view is Wetiko, because Wetiko is a form of blindness. It's a form of mind blindness. But it's a peculiar form of blindness because it imagines itself to be sighted, and not only that, so it doesn't know it's blind, but it imagines that it's more sighted than people who actually see, and it's so wild. Yeah.
Elon Musk is referring to it as the woke mind virus right now. Have you checked that out?
Yeah. I was so happy because the woke thing really freaks me out. And the fact that even just the phrase mind virus is more and more becoming part of our vocabulary.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's all over the place. Even somebody just sent me something like a politician or something, some major people like Elon Musk being a perfect example. I was ecstatic when I saw that.
Yeah.
And for example, Eckhart Tolle, recently he's, emphasizing, there's like this mental virus and it's contagious and it's the source of the collective insanity. And, and so many people are writing me going, did he read your work? Because he's basically saying the same thing I've been saying for 20 some odd years.
Which makes me really believe that there is a higher power, that this is an idea whose time has come. It's gotten so dark and so obvious the way that the fake news and the people who run the fake news, who have no compassion for humanity. I mean, we don't have to call them out by names. You know what I'm talking about. And it's the same as it ever was. For thousands of years, there were those who believed in inversions and redemption through sin, to do the exact opposite of what we're talking about. And unfortunately, they've become really, really good fighters because they don't have morals, and we want to mind our own business. We expect other people to respect children and mind their own business. But we found out that that's not the way that the world goes. We can't just hide our heads in the sand and pretend that it doesn't exist. I got involved with this because I saw about the abuse of children, concrete evidence that, millions of children disappear to sick people who are fueled by evil. And I personally want that to stop.
Right. Well, exactly. I think of in the collective works, Jung talks about the profound importance for us to develop what he calls an imagination for evil. Because as like normal, healthy, good people, we can't even conceive of what people who are taken over by the Wetiko mind virus, what they would do to, in other words, access power. And because Jung says this, he goes, because we haven't sufficiently cultivated that imagination for evil, that then unwittingly makes us an instrument for evil, and it disables our ability to actually deal with evil in our world. Because he talks about that, and he's not talking about sort of metaphysical evil or spiritual evil. He's a psychologist and a psychiatrist. He's talking about psychological evil, the evil that exists, whose origin is within the psyche, that fuels our addictions, our self-destructive behavior, our self-hatred. And, that he says that you can't just deny that and say that's not real. No, that has effects all around us in our day-to-day lives. And so people who are just saying, oh, evil isn't real, he goes, yeah, they're actually unwittingly, by avoiding relationship with a part of themselves, they're unwittingly becoming a minion for evil by holding that viewpoint. I mean, that's my interpretation. But the idea being that we have to really entertain what is the nature of the beast we're dealing with, and it makes me think in the new book, the one that just came out a few days ago, I have a chapter on the clairvoyant Rudolf Steiner. And Rudolf Steiner, he gave a prediction for this time in history. He says the greatest event in our world today is the incarnation of what he calls the etheric Christ. And he goes, so he's pointing out that Christ isn't going to come in a particular one, body like he did 2,000 years ago, but that Christ energy is incarnating through the collective unconscious of our species, through all of us. And we all have a shadow, whereas Christ, 2,000 years ago, all of the darkness was kept out of his vehicle. And, think about it, right when Christ incarnated 2,000 years ago, who actually showed up on the scene was Satan. And when you see that symbolically, like it's a dream, here's an expression of the polarization in the collective psyche. There's the light, there's the dark, and they're split and they're adversarial. What Steiner is saying is that, okay, now instead of the light incarnating from heaven, through one human being, it's incarnating through the darkness, from below, through the shadow, and it's incarnating through creaturely man who are tainted with original sin and have a shadow. And he goes, and what Steiner is saying is that before we can actualize the incarnation of the etheric Christ, we have to encounter the beast. Then beast is radical evil. And that's exactly creating context for what's happening today. We are, the closer that God and humanity gets, the greater the possibility of confrontation with evil. That's what's happening. And yet there's an incredible opportunity, because what Jung says, and he's very clear on this, is that encoded within evil is God has implanted a special purpose. That's his words. That it is most important for humanity to know. And because he points out, he goes, in an individual process, when there's evil, that comes into their process, invariably it brings about a higher good that never would have emerged without that emergence of evil. And I'm wondering about, whether the same process is true collectively, that as this evil, not just through one human being, but in our world, through our species, is getting played out, there's also this incredible potentiality for some higher form of light to emerge. And this is Kabbalistic thinking, because in Kabbalah, they talk about that hidden, encoded in the evil is the true light.
Man, well said. I totally agree. And without some of the hard times that we went through, you and I for certain wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So I have to kind of, not only thank God for unanswered prayers, but also, have to thank my dysfunctional family upbringing for giving me a reason to not be comfortable within the illusion
Right, right. And that's a beautiful way of like recontextualizing your like dysfunctional sort of childhood and abuse, and think about it something, oh, that shouldn't have happened, and feeling victimized by it or feeling resentful or bitter, and actually like reframing it to be like, wow, that was an essential part of my initiatory ordeal that's
Mhm.
brought me to the stage of awakening.
Correct. Just like if you have been mugged before, perhaps you can show somebody how to protect themselves from getting mugged at the same place in the same way. So we're essentially, in my way of looking at it, getting mugged, or we're allowing ourselves to be mugged by forces that basically are stealing away our our positivity, our feeling of love and optimism, and a lot of people are outwardly protesting against people who are offering hope. They're calling us hopium salesmen or whatever. They're like, "How dare you offer us hope?" Because they're so terrified of having their fragile feelings possibly hurt by not getting what they think that they want. So essentially, for us to be able to do this, we have to be able to be, you know, strong and courageous enough to feel uncomfortable, dark things, and shine the light into the dark, so then we can actually have change, not just moments of clarity after a psychedelic experience or a meditation or a good conversation, but lasting change is what we really want, because this planet has got a crisis of thinking. If people can change their thinking, we can change the planet. But people are thinking that if we just give people money, they'll be better with their bad thinking. And more money is not going to make bad thinking better.
Totally agree. Like, I love that in a way we're having a crisis of thinking or of perception, you know, and but both of those point to that the real crisis is within our psyche. And you know, it's, I mean, you know, just to create context that we're having this conversation in the midst of a world gone totally mad, where evil is seemingly like creeping all over the globe, you know, centralizing power and control, taking away our freedom and all that. And you know, so what I'm talking about is, yeah, not just like, you know, theoretically or abstract or philosophically, but how do we actually, what do we do? Because, you know, as we see, you know, this like, you know, the fascist totalitarian forces literally taking over, you know, our country or the world. And by the way, that's an expression of Wetiko, because like in the collected works, Jung, he didn't have the name Wetiko, but he was pointing at it again and again in all these different ways. And one of the main ways, the main names he used for it was totalitarian psychosis. Okay.
Hmm.
Now think about what happens when this totalitarian psychosis or this Wetiko gets in an individual psyche. First off, it hijacks the executive function, it colonizes the psyche, all of the healthy parts of the psyche get subsumed into supporting the pathogen,
Mm-hmm.
captures all the monitoring system, the regulatory agencies of the psyche get captured that should be surveilling and monitoring and stopping invaders. It doesn't recognize the invaders because it's gotten captured. And then this Wetiko energy creates a shadow government within the psyche, and it dictates to the ego like a dictator. And what I'm describing, that's how Wetiko literally possesses an individual human psyche. Well, think
Mm-hmm.
about that. Wetiko is an inner disease of the soul that actually extends itself out in the world and creatively and expresses itself via configuring events in the outer world. So think
Absolutely.
about what I just described for what happens when the mind virus gets in an individual psyche. That's actually what's happening in the outer world with the
Yeah.
totalitarian forces. It's capturing the regulatory agencies, setting up, you know, the deep state, the shadow government. It's like colonizing people's psyches. The whole thing I just described is happening on a macrocosmic level. See, and that's important because Wetiko, it, you know, you can't see it, but it's hiding in plain sight. And in other words, when you recognize, wait a second, what's happening in the world's body politic and collectively what's happening in the world on the world stage is actually reflecting what's happening inside of my own mind. Then all of a sudden, when you recognize the outer is reflecting the inner, that's to recognize the dreamlike nature. When you recognize the dreamlike nature, that's where you're really like tapping in, because that's when you stabilize that. And this is what every spiritual tradition is about, is introducing people, you know, and when I say the dreamlike nature, I don't mean this is like in a metaphorical sense. I mean, I remember having this kind of, not an argument, more of a friendly debate with this very eminent Tibetan translator who, like a number of years ago, came to visit me for tea. And the disagreement was, he was saying, no, this is metaphorically like a dream. And I was saying, no, there's no metaphor about it. This is a dream. This is nothing other than a collectively shared dream. We have gotten in, you know, we are unconsciously dreaming this dream to manifest the way it is with all its insanity and evil, because we've been conditioned based on our own wounding and trauma to dream it that way. And as soon as you see the, and you know, and I can go way more into this because it's so profound. When you you know, and then when you see, no, you know, the world is not a dream. The world is, this is objective, the way it, you know, it's objectively manifesting that way. Well, then the dream, this waking dream, being a dream, has no choice but to shapeshift and give you all the evidence confirming your mistaken viewpoint that this isn't a dream. And the more you see it as not a dream. So an example, in a night dream, if I'm holding a viewpoint, right? And the night dream, what is the night dream? But it's a reflection of my own mind. Whatever viewpoint I'm holding, the night dream just instantaneously gives me all the confirmation, all the evidence, you know, to prove to me that my viewpoint is objectively true. So if I interpret it that way, then I get more entrenched in my viewpoint, and the more fixed in my viewpoint, the more the dream, in the night dream, will just give me evidence confirming the truth of my viewpoint ad infinitum. It's a feedback loop that reinforces itself, whose origin is my own mind. That's
But
what.
how can you be a victim? How can you be a victim if you understand that? And people
Yeah,
love being
no,
victims.
but when you, but right, but because people are, exactly, people are unconsciously identified and perversely get off on and get benefit from playing the victim. But when you see through that, you realize, no, I'm participating in this. There's no one doing this to me. You know, yeah, like it's just like getting traumatized. There might be a historical moment where somebody played the agent of the perpetrator and you become like traumatized, but then they exit stage left. And what happens if it's trauma? If it's abuse, you introject it and you internalize it. The abuser is gone. Then you're just doing it to yourself. That's what
Yeah,
I'm pointing out. We're colluding with our own abuse, you
yeah,
see? And so what I'm pointing out, the implication is that we have this incredible, so on the one hand, you know, so many of us feel powerless and helpless and, oh, there's nothing I can do, and, you know, and all, and just make the best of it, you know, which then that feeds the mind virus, you know, to play itself out collectively. But what
yeah,
I'm pointing out is that each one of us have this unimaginably vast creative power inside of us. And this is what quantum physics is pointing out, that we ourselves are creating our experience of ourselves and of the world moment by moment. There's no one else doing that to us. And when you realize that, it's an incredible like responsibility, but it actually is the way to freedom, because it's actually the way to, oh, wait, if I'm creating my experience, I can create my experience in a way that's serving me, that's dispelling Wetiko, or I can create my experience where I'm just like traumatizing myself and investing in my own wounding and perpetrating my own abuse, and then feeling victimized, and then feeling helpless. And there's no one else doing that. You're doing that. That's what
yeah.
I'm trying to point out, that that's the choice point.
That's giving people salvation right here on earth, though. It's a
Right.
big deal. So this is the most important information. And I know it sounds pompous to say that, but it's not. You can call the moon whatever you want. It's still the moon. You can call Wetiko evil or archons or AI. You can call it whatever you want, but it's still a massive, massive part of our collective awakening on this planet. And without it, we would never awake, because we needed the agitation and
Yeah.
like the be buried in the darkness like a seed in order to get the lessons to not just be essentially a robot. And that's why we needed free will. And people often say that, you know, if God's real, why would they allow this evil? and then it's a lack of expanded thinking that's keeping people trapped in a zero-sum game that's causing them to
Yeah.
project their self-loathing onto other
Yeah,
groups.
well, Jung, in answer to Job, calls Satan the godfather of humanity as a spiritual
Mm,
being. That's
mm,
the idea, that this like sort of demonic energy, it's actually potentially catalyzing us into evolving. Like what
yeah,
you said was the greatest catalyst for human evolution ever known. And you're totally right. It makes no difference whether you call it Wetiko or the archons or the devil, or doesn't make a difference what name, but just find a name for it, because naming something, just like in fairy tales, when the hero, when they find the name of the offending demon, that's when they take away the demon's power. Because
yeah,
when you name it, it's a characteristic of that you're seeing it. When you objectify it, all of a sudden now you're not unconsciously identified with it, you're not possessed by it, but you've distinguished yourself
yeah,
from it, and that's why, the importance of finding the name. And, I had named it before I found the word Wetiko, because I had written a book in the early 2000s where I was pointing at this and I was calling it malignant egophrenia, ME disease, me disease. It's a misidentification of who we think we are. And it's exactly that sense of, if we identify with a separate self, with, this reference point in third dimensional space and time, then we will spend the rest of our lives defending and protecting that separate self. That's an illusion. It doesn't even exist.
yeah,
And this is, you can think of this is an illusion that generates a myriad of other illusions. But if the real, like, primordial illusion isn't seen through, well, then we're caught in that self-generating illusion. And Buddhism, that's what's called samsara. That's the realm of cyclic existence. That's the realm of endless suffering. And there's no one who's doing that to us. We actually, based on our own ignorance, on our own, unawareness, we're actually participating in creating that.
yeah. And so the antidote to Wetiko, most simply,
Yeah, the antidote, I mean, and that's a great question. There are a lot of different, think about it like a jewel with all these aspects. So on the one hand, one of the antidotes, and they're all like really fundamental antidotes, is to really remember who we are, to be in touch with our nature. And what is our nature? Our nature is, by its nature, creative. And the more we're aware of our nature, of our creative nature, the more we embody and express ourselves creatively. And the more we embody and express ourselves creatively, the more we know our nature. It's a positive feedback loop that creates light upon light. So on the one hand, there's that. On the other hand, there's like, oh yeah, to recognize the dreamlike nature, right? Because the dreamlike nature, you realize, oh, we're all dream characters in each other's dream. We're having a shared collective dream. We're interdependent, interconnected. There's no separate self. This world is malleable. That's the greatest discovery, according to one quantum physicist of the 20th century, is the malleability of this universe, that it's not written in stone. So the true nature is one, the dreamlike nature is another way of describing the antidote. Love and compassion, which is the expression of our nature, is another antidote. Being creative, which is the nature of the higher self, of our true nature, expressing ourselves creatively, is another way of saying it. Seeing the non-local field, which is a quantum physics term, which sort of in which we're all contained and underlies all manifestation. And seeing that that expands our consciousness. That's to see the dreamlike nature. All of this, all of these are just different articulations of the antidote, for Wetiko. But if we're not switched on in that way, and then, that's to then fall under the spell of thinking we exist in a way that we don't, as a separate self, thinking this is objective and real and not dreamlike, all of those ways are just, then those feed into us falling prey to the mind virus.
Yeah, just like the Matrix movie, where the Agent Smith can jump into different people, and the illusions seem real. And even if somebody was to come up and tell you, hey, you're maybe on a loop, you're dating the same person over and over again and expecting different results, all these different things, instead of dealing with what's going on inside, right? I wrote something I'd like to read to you real quickly, just the other day, just riffing. Because I'm seeing the family trauma being one of the most important things that you're bringing up here, and how it can be generationally passed on, like a corrupted file that's just being reprinted over and over, instead of, defragmenting it and finding out what's really going on. So anyway, family trauma is like a splinter lodged in your flesh. It must go out the way that it came in. In other words, it's necessary to trace the source of the pain and identify it and let it rise so that it can release. Covering the splinter up with a callus, which countless people choose to do, does not address or heal the trauma file lodged in the mainframe of our being, of which we perceive the world through. So it's of the utmost importance to see the entrance wound that may have been obscured by a thick callus, causing the pain to be distributed to a larger surface area of the body. And over the years, the pain seems to be just another way of saying that life is painful. It's just the way life is, instead of just simply pulling out the foreign object, pulling it out the same way that it came in, offering a lasting relief.
Yeah, that's super cool. Wow, that's beautiful. And it brings up for me like the idea, because one way of understanding Wetiko, because keep in mind in my work, I'm continually sort of like circumambulating Wetiko and describing it in as many creative ways as I can imagine to help people to see it, And one of the ways that I describe it is that it's very related to both addiction and trauma. Because think about what happens in trauma. We get traumatized, right? And one very simple way of understanding that is that it's so overwhelming, the moment of trauma, whatever it is, that we can't integrate it, we can't, symbolically express it. So we split, we disassociate because it's overwhelming. And then, so that part of us that splits, that disassociates, if we don't integrate it, it develops in a way a seeming autonomy or independent life and will of its own that's very adversarial to us. And, in psychology speak, that can become what's called an autonomous complex. And the indigenous people call that a demon. Okay. And so that's a way of describing Wetiko. But think about what happens when you have this autonomous complex, this demon, this trauma. What happens is that the way you try to heal from the trauma actually recreates the trauma you were trying to heal from. That's the repetition compulsion. That's like you were saying, somebody gets in the same type of relationship again and again and again. They're just like unconsciously re-traumatizing themselves. Now, this beautiful way of describing trauma is that it's unexperienced experience. That at the moment of experiencing the trauma, we couldn't consciously experience it because we weren't there. We split, we dissociated, so it never was able to become assimilated. So the idea is that, what is the pathology of trauma? It's the repetition compulsion, right? And we're fated to continually like re-traumatize ourselves. That is the symptomology of trauma. But I'm pointing out that hidden, secretly encoded in our acting out of the trauma, that is the pathology, is the solution. We're actually trying to consciously experience that trauma so as to liberate it, so as to discharge it. But if we don't do that, we're fated to just endlessly re-traumatize ourselves. And so that in a way is very symbolic of Wetiko. That hidden, encoded in Wetiko, being a quantum phenomena, is both the pathology, it's the source of the most intense evil, and it actually has its own vaccine, has its own medicine, and not only that, but it's actually helping us to evolve.
Yeah, it is. It's totally true. And there's better ways to do it than others. And a lot of time, it's kind of just wanting to cover up or be comfortable instead of feeling the great pain of trauma and sorrow. So we have relationships, for example, a heart splinters, right? It's kind of an analogy. If somebody's got a splinter lodged in their heart, and the new lover endeavors to massage the other side of the heart to try to make the other side feel better, instead of just helping to find the source of the pain and pull that original splinter out, and then you can really receive love instead of just trying to, distract yourself with sensation, or having other people distract you from your pain. So it takes a courageous warrior to do it.
Yeah, well, there are two things that brings up. Like, one thing, this amazing healer, Fritz Perls, who started Gestalt therapy, he talks about that, so many of us have internalized these unhealthy parental introjects that
Yeah.
aren't really to be assimilated into our psyche because they're pathological, right?
Okay.
And it says the way to somatically, to energetically, viscerally, experience, how to deal with that is to get in touch with the feeling of, like, when you want to vomit and you feel this nausea, that nauseous feeling, that is our organism's embodied response of something has been, like, pushed down our throat that's not meant to be integrated into our wholeness. And when you feel the nausea, it's like the body's response is just wanting to expel that unhealthy introject. And he says that's a good symbol, energetically speaking, of what happens when we have, like, psychological, introjects in us, and they're not to be metabolized, but no, they're meant to be expelled because they're not actually, they don't belong to us.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing, there's this great this priest named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I don't know if you know him. He was a German priest who escaped Germany during World War II and came to the West, but then was such a bodhisattvic being, he felt it was his mission to minister to his people because he was German. So he went back to Germany and he got imprisoned by the Nazis and he got executed, like, I think a few weeks before the Allies liberated Germany. But Bonhoeffer basically was saying that he goes to voluntarily choose to experience pain is death to evil. Okay. So there's that thing where, yeah, life is painful. And it's one thing I want to distinguish between, like, the pain of just, us beating ourselves up, or us, turning on ourselves and judging ourselves. That's like we've gotten hit by an arrow, and that's the second arrow. That's unnecessary. That's what the Buddha realized, because the Buddha was a physician who discovered the cure for suffering. And and the cure was that the clinging and that we actually self-contract against our own light. And that's totally, it's like we're pinching ourselves and we're screaming because it hurts. But the idea is, how do you discover that, I myself am doing that? That's what the Buddha realized, that we are actually participating in creating our own suffering. And that's crazy. But the good news is that, well, we can stop doing that, and that's different than Christian mystics talk about. There's a suffering that comes from God that's purifying us, like 24 karat gold gets refined in a hot furnace. It's a purification. That's suffering that the Christian mystics, praise that suffering and wouldn't ever want to not have that suffering because it brings them more closer to God. But the erotic suffering where we beat ourselves up, that's the suffering that the Buddha realized, no, we are doing that and we need to stop doing that. So the idea is, being in life, it can be painful. And when we're actually able to just presence our pain instead of dissociating from it or avoiding it, which is in essence avoiding relationship with part of ourselves or judging it, but actually just presence it and be with it, that actually, then evil has no currency on us. That's, like Bonhoeffer saying, is death to evil.
I love that. Thank you. That's a great analogy there. And yeah, so Wetiko can work you over, or you can make Wetiko work for you.
Yeah. Right. It's actually, I mean, and what the image that comes up, the Buddha, when he was sitting under the Bodhi tree about to become enlightened, what happened? Wetiko, the Mara and the evil one, that's who Mara was, all the forces of evil just began attacking Buddha and tormenting him and trying to seduce him and distracting him. And I point out in one of my books that oh, those forces of evil were actually secretly Buddha's allies. They actually helped him to catapult into realization that
Mhm.
without those like tormenting forces, he wouldn't have developed the muscle to have realization, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
And because the same fuel that's fueling the seeming evil aspect of Wetiko, the idea is that we're all potential alchemists and we can plug in to that energy and recirculate it in a way that actually fuels our love and our compassion and our nature and our creativity.
Yeah. Man, that's what's so poetic and beautiful about it, you know. And it's a
Totally.
participatory event, you know. It's not a spectator sport.
Right. Well, that's quantum physics. Quantum physics
Mhm.
pointed out, if I could just say a few words about, because quantum physics is offering us the medicine for Wetiko. Because so before quantum physics, there was the Newtonian classical physics,
Yeah.
which just thought this universe existed objectively, and we're just the passive observers trying to study it and understand it. And then quantum physics came along, early 20th century, and it came into the world, it came into our minds. And quantum physics empirically proved again and again that no, there is no objective universe out there. That's just an idea in our mind, that the act of observing the universe actually influences the universe that we're observing, which is to say the act of observation is creative. Okay,
Mhm.
that's the rabbit hole. Once you realize that, oh my God, because here's the thing. You see, quantum physics is so profound, and it's literally offering us the medicine for the mind virus, because when you see through the imagination or the idea of that this universe exists objectively separate from us, then all of a sudden it puts into question, what about me as a subject? Because if I'm identifying with a subject, with an ego, with a reference point in third dimensional space and time, with a separate self, if I experience myself as a subject, well, okay, yeah, if the world is an object, well, then I'm a subject in relationship to that object. But if the world isn't objective, then what happened to the subject? Because I, as a subject, need an object be in relationship with. And if there's no object, because quantum physics is saying not only is there no objective universe, there's no objective anything. There's no things, that everything, it's one seamless wholeness. Everything is interdependent, interconnected. That's the nature of this quantum universe. And this universe has been proven to be quantum in nature. So then all of a sudden, when you see through the illusion of the objective world, you recognize, oh, there's no separate subject. Well, wait a
Mhm.
second. Then who am I? You see, so quantum physics is promoting itself to be a spiritual path, because that subjective experience of feeling yourself to be a subject and that experience of thinking the world exists as an object reciprocally co-arise, and in this mutual way reinforce each other. So the object and the subject, they reciprocally co-arise, and it's a feedback loop that if we don't see through, then we're caught in samsara. Then we think we're a subject, we think the world is an object, and then we've just ossified ourselves into an identity that's not who we are. That's Wetiko. So that's what I mean, that quantum physics is actually, by dispelling the notion of an objective world, it's showing us, in essence, that this universe is a dream. And you see,
Mhm.
the typical corporate physicists, they're not trained in this way. You see, there's no disagreement at all that I'm aware of that quantum physics is the greatest discovery ever in all of human history, okay, in the realm of science. That there's no debate about. The big controversy is, what does it mean? And I'm not a physicist at all. I'm just somebody who's very curious, and really, I began having these experiences over 40 years ago, where I had snapped out of the mainstream spell. And, I had been diagnosed and told, oh, you're mentally ill. And I just never bought into that for a second. And then I found quantum physics, and I realized, oh my God, this is describing and articulating the very universe that I had fallen into. And so here, I'm not a physicist, but I'm pointing out what quantum physics has discovered is that we're having a collective dream,
Yeah.
and we can wake up in the dream. And when any of us, when we sufficiently awaken to the dreamlike nature, yeah, that'll help our lives, in immeasurable ways. But we're only one person, and 8 billion of our species, we're co-dreaming together. What I'm pointing out is when you connect with other people who are also awakening to the dreamlike nature, and you get to connect and to share your realization, and you get to actually dream ourselves awake. You can activate the collective genius in a way where you can actually help each other to awaken, and that goes viral, and that becomes contagious. And then we discover, oh my God, we are actually consciously participating in our own evolution, and that's what this is all about.
Wow.
And that's what I'm pointing out, you know. And one very simple way of understanding that, imagine you're in a night dream, and imagine in that night dream, you, the dream ego of Adam, has lucidity, and you realize, oh my God, I'm dreaming. But then there are all these other characters in the dream. Now imagine if some of them, like me and maybe some of our mutual friends, we come together and we realize, oh my God, we're having a dream, we're co-dreaming. This dream universe is manifesting the way it is because we've been conditioned, you know, based on our trauma, to dream it up in such a limited, suffering-filled way. But
Yeah.
this is a collectively shared dream. We can activate what I call our sacred power of dreaming in a way where we can dream the dream differently. We can dream the dream in a way that's much more in alignment with who we're discovering ourselves to be, which is not the separate self, but, you know, we're all cells in a greater being. And that's what I'm pointing out. And I'm just describing in a night dream. That's clearly, you know, that clearly can happen. I'm saying that's the nature of our situation in the waking dream.
Mm. The waking dream is also characters that are not separate from our own psyche, and they're not, you know, doing something to us that we're not participating in allowing at
Yeah,
some level.
we're all co-dreaming, you
Yeah.
know, together. And that's why, you know, I have all these groups, and we really inquire into, what if we were to take seriously that this is a dream? I mean, all the spiritual teachings are saying that. What if we were to fully step into, what would that look like? You know, how would we, if this is a dream? Well, okay, we're all dreaming this together. And if we all have that realization, how do we want to dream it? And all of a sudden, we're much more a choice, instead of just compulsively, unconsciously enacting our trauma and all that. No, it opens up like vast possibilities.
Yeah, which is why we're a threat to that hegemony at such a massive degree, where they're terrified of us dreaming up the new earth, new cities, all the benefits without the detriments, you know. And that's what us visionaries feel burning in our hearts, you know. And so that's why I want to say that I feel encouraged being on social media. I'm on Truth Social, and there's a lot of heart and a lot of people who are awakening beyond the official narratives. I didn't have any interest in politics, and never have. 2017, I got enough information to see that there's the deep state cabal that's harming children, and how it goes back hundreds and if not thousands of years. And the buck has to stop eventually. And so for me, seeing that this isn't a separate world out there, I can't just allow myself to bypass the evil that is harming our children especially, and also causing people to turn against each other based on fake news, ridiculous things that aren't even true. And so yeah, the awakening is a big part of it. So a lot of my audience is going to see this, who are Christian-based patriot community, but they also are in alignment with wanting to dispel the evil from the world. So I'm really grateful to bridge these worlds the best that I can, and to let people, there's nothing they need to fear about these Native American terms. You know, there's a lot of Native American terms that we use in our daily life as food and different things. And so this is something that should be looked in without rigidity, because it's not written out in the Bible specifically, but like you said earlier,
this is written.
it is in the Bible.
It is totally in the Bible. That's what I point out in one of my Wetiko books. I correlate all of the Bible is pointing at Wetiko again and again and again. All I am is, just a translator. I'm just translating, all of the wisdom traditions, not just the Bible, but in Buddhism and Hinduism and Kabbalah and Sufism, Islam, Hawaiian Kahuna. Every wisdom tradition from time immemorial is pointing out what the indigenous Native American people mean by Wetiko. And you're totally right that the powers that be, they're threatened by us, as we awaken to our intrinsic creative power. That's their worst nightmare, and particularly when we come together. And I've just gotten cast in the role, whatever little role I'm in, of just, okay, no, I'm translating this timeless wisdom into a modern psychological idiom, spiritual idiom too, that can really, I think people in the modern day world can really understand. And so many people, when they hear this idea of a mind virus and what it actually means and what it's about, they get psychoactivated. They get their psyche gets activated. They start dreaming. They start getting creative. Their heart opens. They are cultivating, more expanded awareness. They have like more love and compassion, and it's cutting through that sense of separation. Because in a sense, we're all on the same side. The idea of, it's amazing the polarization that's come into our world the last number of years around, take your pick, the vaccine or the war in Ukraine or Trump or this or that. I mean, it's like fractured humanity, and never before, not to my knowledge, has there been such a state of polarization in our world where it's even hard to have like conversations with people, and so the powers that be are really, threatened by people who are awakening. But that's, that shouldn't stop us, because no, you see, the idea is, in my new book, I have a huge chapter on shamanism, and that we're all shamans in training. And it's interesting, I wrote this chapter right before the lockdown happened. And little did I realize I was being prescient. I was pointing out that we as a species are going through an incredible death rebirth experience.
Yeah.
And then the lockdown happened, and little did I realize how plugged in I was in that way. And, the idea of a shaman, when the shaman is the wounded healer.
Yeah.
And I relate to that because I'm like so in touch with this woundedness. And for years and years, based on my own trauma, and I won't go into the story, but for years, I was like, oh, I have to heal this trauma. And then at a certain point, I began to realize, what if it never gets healed? Well, the idea of a wounded healer, the shaman, they suffer an incurable wound, but they carry it in a way where that wound becomes a portal to their deeper creative gifts.
Oh, yeah.
So that's exactly, and the idea, the shaman not only is the wounded healer, but is the storyteller. They're the dreamer and they're the creative artist. Okay. So they take their pain, and instead of just compartmentalizing it or disassociating from it or making the best of it, no, they they transmute it alchemically into creativity. They find their voice. And so we are all like potentially shamans in training, and if I could just say a little bit more about the whole shamanic thing, because it's so profound, and it's the major, or one of the major archetypes that's activated in the collective psyche and of our species, right? And so there are two dangers of the whole shamanic trip that I just want to, before I go more into it. One of them is for people who have a little bit of experience of like, and I'm no shaman, I should just say, only in my wildest dreams am I a shaman, but the shamanic archetype, which is the deeper patterning informing my process, has been activated for years. And at a certain point, I realized, well, I've been enlisted into some sort of shamanic ordeal. And so the two dangers, one is to have somebody have a little bit of experience with the shamanic process and then put themselves off as a shaman, and they have no idea of the powers and principalities, which is a phrase in the Bible, we're not fighting against flesh and blood, we're fighting against powers and principalities. That's the archetypal, transpersonal, higher dimensional powers.
Yeah.
And for somebody who has very little understanding of that, to put themselves off as a shaman, they could be doing incredible damage to themselves and other people. The other great danger of the shamanic trip is for us to become unconscious of our shamanic gifts. We all have shamanic gifts, okay? Now think about what a shaman does. they typically, the shaman becomes wounded and traumatized or abused, just in their life. That starts the call, because then what happens? They dissociate, and then that consolates the shamanic journey, where eventually they go off to try to retrieve the long lost part of their soul and to remember it, to remember members of parts of our body, to remember, to like, that's the healing of like dismembering it, which is a shamanic stage. You remember, you retrieve your soul back into the wholeness, right? So they go on the shamanic journey. Well, what is the shaman doing? Say if the shaman is working with a client or with a community, right? The shaman, because they have such deep empathy, they take on the illness. And by taking it on, it has a double meaning. They have it out with the illness, they wrestle with the illness, but they take it within themselves and they fall ill. Okay, that's an essential part of the shamanic process. So the shaman falls ill, but if they stay ill, then they're going to need a shaman. They're going to not be able to be of benefit. But if they're an accomplished shaman, they take the occasion of them falling ill as a way of finding their way back to their wholeness, to their center, to themselves. And by doing that, they actually over time metabolize the illness. And now they're even more in touch with themselves than before, having fallen ill. And by them doing that, they've created the template, or they're modeling for the client or for the community. They're making it more available for other people to then find their way back to their wholeness, just in a non-local, energetic way. In a sense, we are all those shamans in training. We've been made sick. We've been sickened by the collective madness that we're all dreaming up. We're not separate from it, but we've all been affected by the collective madness. How can we not? We're not separate from it. But if we then stay sick and just stay in this disassociated state, that's no good. But the idea is to actually find our way back to ourselves and connect, because remember, the shaman is the creative artist, and to connect with our creative spirit that is our nature. Then we are in a sense embodying being that heroic identity, that shaman, that wounded healer, that bodhisattva, that practitioner, a lot of different names for it. Then we're actually being of help to the world.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, I really like that. I can't even imagine a world without the dark defining the light now. And then it flips the script, because you're not constantly trying to fight Wetiko. It's because the Wetiko seems to like the fight, right? It likes to engage in the drama, and it likes the conflict. So if you're not conflicting with it, you're just not necessarily giving it its food source, then you can live a different life.
It's a tricky thing, because you're totally right. There's a difference between fighting the devil and having love for God. Those are two radically different things. And once we try to fight Wetiko, we've already lost, because we're playing its game.
Yeah.
So you're totally right. There's a couple things I want to bring up. One is, and I talk about this in my work, one is like, there's the biblical story of like Jacob when he's wrestling with the dark angel, right? And he has to make it till sunrise. He knows he has to make it till sunrise, and then he makes it. Then dawn comes, and he's made it through. And then he asked the angel for its blessing, and the angel touches his hip, and he gets wounded in the hip, right? And the angel then changes his name to Israel, he who has wrestled with God. And the idea is that the angel, the dark angel, this is like wanting to kill him. The dark angel, it's symbolic of that, an encounter with the self, and the self is a totality, which includes both light and dark, is a wounding experience for the ego. Jung talks about this a lot. But then the idea is by actually like surviving the ordeal, when the angel changes Jacob's name, it's symbolic of that his nature has been changed via the encounter. But then the question, how come Jacob was wrestling with that angel? right? And the answer is he would have been killed otherwise. So there are certain times you have to have it out with that demon to just say, oh, no, 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 I don't want to fight. Well, then you're avoiding relationship with something. You know, it's very much like in a fairy tale. Sometimes the hero at the beginning of the fairy tale will meet the demon and they have to run away, because if they fight the demon, then they'll get destroyed because they haven't developed enough ego strength. And that's not cowardice, that's wisdom. But then at a certain point, towards the end of the fairy tale, the would-be hero or heroine meets the demon, and then if they run, that's cowardice. Then they have to have it out with the demon, you know? And one other thought, you see, the thing about Wetiko, it's you know, it's so funny. So I live, the closest bookstore to where I live is one of the biggest metaphysical bookstores in the country. And they know me, and I've been on the faculty for years, and they carry, you know, I've taught there and I donate to them, and, you know, all that stuff, you know, during the lockdown to keep them in business. But they won't carry my Wetiko books because they're so identified with love and light that they don't even want to let in the store any book that mentions evil. And so I point out that, you see, they're an example, and they're good people, but they're just asleep in this particular way. I point out when we're avoiding dealing with darkness, we're unwittingly feeding it in our, because we're avoiding relationship with what it brings up in us. But if we become too fascinated with evil, well, then we're feeding it too. But the idea is that there's a third way, a middle way. And the middle way is to see Wetiko, to see how it plays out in our world, to see how it plays out via our unconscious reactions and how it plays out in our mind. And then when you see it, we as a sovereign being get to decide where we place our attention. And now we can say, okay, I see you. I'm not turning a blind eye, because that turning a blind eye is Wetiko. But now that I see you, I as a sovereign being get to choose where I invest my attention. I want to invest my attention in creating the world I want to live in. That's kryptonite to Wetiko.
I love it, man. Way to go. Way to bring this information to us in a way that is palatable. And this is the third book of your series. Congratulations. It just seems like yesterday that Dispelling Wetiko, you know, landed on my desk, and I just was seeing all of it through my family structures. And I like in this book, specifically the Undreaming Wetiko, where you talk about the genetic family Wetiko that is passed on through generation after generation.
Yeah. No, I think that's the first chapter in the book, you know, because it's so important. Because for years I've been contemplating, what is the origin of Wetiko? You know, oh, is it like a collective trauma that our species suffered way back when, or was it like negative ETs, and more I'm convinced, or, you know, that it's multi-generational ancestral trauma and abuse, unhealed, that gets enacted and passed down through the generations. And I think this is, Jung was pointing at this when he says evil gets propagated over the generations, right? So, and this is the way it works, that if, you know, if I'm like traumatized and have abuse and wounding and I don't do my work, then I'm fated. I'm going to compulsively enact it onto the next of kin, and then they're going to be the recipient of the trauma. And then, you know, unless they do their work, they're going to pass it on to their, you know, wife or husband or kid, or, you know, or whatever. And it just gets passed down over time through the generations until somebody has the realization, no, the buck needs to stop here. I'm going to be the link in the chain that's going to stop the chain. And then by any person doing their inner work and by integrating that trauma, you know, and I can't explain this, but I intuitively feel it's true. It's like atemporal. It goes back in time, both in the past and in the future, and heals the previous and the future generations of that. And I mean, I think we've all, because this sounds very, oh, these are just ideas, but when you really take in what I'm pointing at, we've all experienced it. We've all, you know, oh yeah, our parents, you know, they were like, you know, well-intentioned and wanting to be good parents, but to the extent that they didn't heal their wound from their parents, you know, then because the way that Jung talks about this, he goes, think about us, we're just a current blossom on the family tree, that we are actually, you know, he says the parents are the children of the grandparents, that's a way to think of it, that there's this lineage. And to the extent that that abuse is interrupted and integrated and stopped, it just gets propagated with ourselves as being the purveyors.
Yeah.
And so this is really something that is not just in the realm of abstract, ideas or theory, but this is something every one of us in different degrees have experienced. And I know for me, that's what initiated my whole interest in Wetiko, was that I was like a happy, healthy kid. And then, my abuse didn't happen when I was 2 or 3 or nonverbal. It happened when I was 19 and 20 and 21. And when I was actually, I had already individuated to whatever degree. I had developed, a fairly stable sense of self. And then as soon as I began to individuate and separate from my father, he absolutely tried to destroy that creative, urge in me, because by me stepping into my light, I was reflecting back to him what he had killed in himself.
Exactly.
Couldn't bear the reminder. So he just compulsively was fated, and not even knowing what he was doing, just tried to destroy my own creativity. But, if it's the true creative spirit, it can't be kept down for long. And it just made me find another way of expressing myself creatively. But that was the very thing. And if I could just, one thing I want to share about that. So at a certain point, at that point, I knew nothing about evil. I was just an innocent, happy, healthy kid in college. I knew nothing about Wetiko or evil or anything like that. But at a certain point, what happened, he enacted this over-the-top evil, and then, it was emotional, psychological abuse, just kept on escalating more and more and more as I was trying to become who I was, which was separate from his version of me. It was actually who I actually was, or who my soul was destined to be. And then, the worst of the abuse, I woke up with a fever for a year, and it lasted for a year.
Wow.
There's nothing physically wrong with me. And then at a certain point after the year, I felt well enough, the fever went away. I moved to the West Coast from the East Coast. And then all of a sudden, the external trauma with this demon, it was like my father had become possessed and some sort of entity had taken him over that was this evil entity, and he was just the instrument. All of a sudden, that evil entity was now living inside of my psyche. And so he had exited stage left. I was 3,000 miles away. And I realized, oh my God, I have a big problem. I was actually enacting the external abuse had gotten internalized. And that's when abuse becomes real abuse. And all of a sudden, the same thing, any independent impulse towards individuation in me would constellate this raging, murderous, hateful demon, blaming, shaming demon in me that was now living inside of my psyche. And it so stopped me from living my life. That's when I realized, oh, I have to get to the bottom of this. And I quickly figured out with my mind that it was of no use. My intellect only went so far. So that's when I stepped back and assumed the position of the witness, which is really to just go into deep spiritual meditative practice. And then after a couple of years of doing that very intensively, I had this huge awakening, where I got hit by a bolt of lightning, but not from the sky, but just, inside of my own brain. And within 24 hours, it was from outside, people saw, it was like I was having this, my whole personality just reconfigured, because I was so ecstatic. Hold on one second, I'm just going to take out a contact.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Yeah. I wear these hard contacts and they get dry. But so what happened, it so freaked people out because I was so ecstatic, because I was realizing once I had the awakening that, oh my God, this is a collective dream. And, we're all dream characters and there's no separate self. It was the good news of the Bible. And I was so excited that I began just sharing it with such enthusiasm. And entheos means to be filled with spirit, that I immediately got hospitalized and, and diagnosed. Oh, you're mentally ill. You'll have this illness the rest of your life. You'll need to be on medication for the rest of your life. And it was so obvious to me that I was having an awakening that I never bought into it for a second. Then I quickly extricated myself from the whole psychiatric scene. But why I tell this story is I began to realize that the same evil entity that had taken over my father on an individual level was now informing and giving shape to this system of psychiatry. Like, because not only did they not recognize the healthy awakening part of me, but they were protecting my father, they were protecting the abuser, and they were diagnosing me with an illness I didn't have, you know. And I mean, it was amazing because the DSM-3 had just come out the year before in 1980 that had come out with a new discovery of a chemical imbalance. So every psychiatrist was saying, oh, you have this chemical imbalance. And I knew that they didn't have any idea what they were talking about. And then the same authors of the DSM-3 years later came out and they said, oh, we just need to confess, we made that up. There's no such thing as a chemical imbalance. It was the pharmaceutical companies that actually, it was their way of making money.
Yeah.
And then, I literally have the quotes that I put in my memoir years later. But then I began to realize, wait a second, that same evil that came through the person of my father, that came through the system of psychiatry, it's the same evil that's informing and configuring, giving shape to the greater body politic of the world. And then I realized, oh my God, these are like iterations of a fractal. It's like non-locally, there's like some sort of evil energy that's like encoded within the fabric of the multidimensional universe, of the whole non-local field. That's when I began to track Wetiko.
Excellent. Yeah, no doubt. Wow.
Yeah.
And once you start identifying it, it finds a way to play out itself more in your life, which can be kind of daunting for people to go further into this,
Yeah. But why I tell my story is that it can be inspiring, because my entire universe, every single person who knew me, sort of like the comforters of Job, they were all saying, oh no, you're just crazy, you're mentally ill, you're in denial of your illness. And I like I said, it couldn't have been more clear from inside of my own head that I was awakening. That was made super obvious to me. And the idea is that instead of getting hooked by other people's version of what was happening to me, I stayed with my own authority and my own experience. And psychiatry, it was so crazy making. Not only were they at certain points not interested in my own experience, but when I would tell them my experience, they would say, no, that's not what you're experiencing. But I was the one who was having the experience. And they were feeling they were more authority of my experience than I was, and I was the one having it, So it was just a total mind fuck. But I think why it's inspirational for people is that, and keep in mind, it destroyed my entire family. My parents both tragically died thinking I was mentally ill, and it was just a nightmare, and then once they died, the rest of the relatives, I haven't heard from them basically for like over 20 years. So I don't really have any family anymore. I mean, I have a huge old family, a bunch of friends, but why it's inspirational for people is because, I went through this incredible ordeal, and instead of just getting taken down, I was able to hold it in a way that catapulted me into this realization of what I'm writing about.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can identify with that big time.
Yeah.
It's what's up. It's what's up right now. And it's just awesome that there's ways to work on it, especially when you have, like my business partner, Lindsay, and I, who started the Targi Botanicals together. We've been reading these books together for the last few years, and seeing how it interplays in our relationship. Even though we have a platonic relationship, we're still in a relationship, and still all of the hurts and the different things that are within can be projected on those who we're working and living with. But if you're literally looking at through the lens of Wetiko and dispelling it, it can make relationships so much easier, and ambitious projects can work with less blowouts and all those kind of things. So that's the thing I'm most excited about, is actually not only just learning it, but using it with all of the people that we interact with, business and socially, people who are willing to look within and self-reflect is an important prerequisite to do business. And because there's a lot of people who might have good intentions, but they're just literally, their unresolved stuff could take out all of our ambitious projects if we let them in too close. even though they've got great personalities and great potential, right? Because a lot of the people who
Totally.
yeah, who have the best intentions might be the ones who are causing the most like poison in the field.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's why a huge chapter I have in the new Wetiko book is about being in a relationship, because being in a relationship is really the main channel that Wetiko works itself out, that it covertly operates and creates misunderstanding and separation and projections and all that. And I mean, just a very simple example, say if you're in a relationship, with your partner, with Lindsay or whoever, and one of you gets triggered, right? And the typical response, and I point this out in the book a lot, is to like, oh, you're triggering me. Oh, if only you would stop doing that, then I would be not triggered. But no, the idea is if you're triggering me, wow, what an incredible opportunity. Instead of my putting my attention on the source of the trigger, which is to put it out there, which is to distract myself from what's actually happening. What about, oh, I'm triggered. I wonder what that's showing me. What an incredible opportunity. And, and when you're in a relationship with people, whether it's platonic, intimate, doesn't make a difference. The idea of having the container where when stuff gets activated and when you get triggered by each other, oh no, that's an incredible opportunity for us to self-reflect. What is that getting touched in us? Then all of a sudden, all of those like rough edges and those unconscious shadow parts that happen in relationship actually become incredible opportunities for deepening our intimate connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And it works. It really makes a big difference. And I see this information changing the world for the better. It already is. The fact that we're even having this conversation on a very auspicious day. Maybe one day we'll reflect upon it in the future, but I do think things happen for a reason, and I feel the Holy Spirit, this guiding luminous light, shining on the world right now, giving us an opportunity, to basically make heaven on earth, or whatever way you want to look at it, to reimagine the earth from the doom and gloom where everything's screwed to where, wait, we're going to see what doesn't work, and we're going to learn what we don't prefer, and we're going to make better choices. And yeah, it's going to be
Yeah, and I see that. I see exactly that as a quantum potential,
yeah,
because quantum physics is pointing out that things is just not a deterministic universe. It's probabilistic.
yeah,
And just to say a little bit more about that. So, quantum physics is really this trying to understand the microstructure. What are the building blocks of this physical universe? And as it went down in scale to smaller and smaller degrees, it didn't find matter, it found mind. Consciousness was like the really fundamental element. And it talks about these quantum, these elementary particles, So think about these elementary particles. That's like the most fundamental building block of this universe. And it points out that the nature of these quantum particles is pure potentiality, that they exist in any and every state they could potentially exist up until the moment of observation. And then it collapses, the wave function collapses into an actualized form, into particular form, and all the other potentialities just vaporize into parallel worlds as if they never existed. But the idea is, and this isn't me, these are the founding fathers of quantum physics, they say that even if one of those possibilities is highly, ridiculously, and that's a quote, unlikely to manifest, the fact that it could be this very next moment could be that highly unlikely, ridiculously improbable moment manifest. And what that means, to bring it down to like the real world, is that even the possibility of us as a species awakening sufficiently so as to not only avert the impending myriad catastrophes that we're like conjuring up, but that we can actually not just avoid them, but turn the energy that was informing them into productive use, into creativity. Quantum physics is saying that's actually like a real potential. And if we're not envisioning that, because so many people are just collapsed in despair and pessimism, oh, there's no hope. But no, quantum physics is saying, no, that's a very real possibility. And if you're not thinking that, then what in the world are you thinking? And just one final thought about that, because I think about this a lot. is that, it's like we've been here before as a species. We've been at this exact place where, there's this incredible energy, there's like potential getting closer of nuclear war and just, destroying the biosphere, destroying the planet, destroying our species. And again and again and again, we've pushed the button and blown ourselves up. And then, in dream time, which is no time at all, we just regenerate, and it takes billions of seeming earthly years. And now we're back at the same place. And this time, are we going to do it again? Or are we going to blow ourselves up? Or are we going to awaken sufficiently to be like, oh, we're going to dream the dream differently, because it's very much like having a recurring dream. And what is a recurring dream expression of? It's like, oh yeah, there's a message and you're not getting the message. So then the dream recurs, and it typically amplifies and gets more and more intense until you finally get the message. And one of the messages of Wetiko, the fact that we have dreamed up, because it's a dreamed up phenomena. That's why the title of my new book is Undreaming Wetiko. One of the messages is, the role we play, the role the psyche plays in creating world events. And when you realize, what does that mean, the role the psyche plays? Oh, this is a dream, that what's happening out here, this is like, the whole idea of synchronicity. Like, that's why I have a huge chapter on synchronicity in the book, in the new book, is that when you actually see that the matrix, the synchronistic matrix that's continually informing and expressing itself through events in our world, then what is that synchronistic matrix? It's where what's happening in the outer world is reflecting and expressing what's happening inside of us, that mind and matter are not separate. What is the circumstance where mind and matter are not separate? It's in a dream, because a dream is our psyche manifesting. That's what all the spiritual traditions are pointing at when they say this. I mean, the Buddha himself was saying this is a dream. How often does Christ say awaken? And so the idea is seeing the synchronistic nature of this universe, seeing that mind and matter actually inform and express and reveal and reflect each other. That's to awaken to the dreamlike nature, and that's once again getting to that place of lucidity. And that point of view dispels Wetiko.
Wow. Well, Paul, I appreciate it so much. And I look forward to hopefully doing more of these with you. I mean, like literally we can go 10 hours per page, even highlighting your book. It was hard to find places not to highlight. And that was the challenge, because
I hear that a lot. I hear that of so many people. They say, I never highlight. And with your book, there's not enough empty space to highlight. It's crazy. Often I hear that.
So it's a compliment and a well-deserved one. And I think this is probably a good time for us to wrap it up. And hopefully, if you'd like, we could do this again and focus on some other chapters. And it's just really great to connect with you and to see you. And
I love that this is the way we're getting to meet each other, is through this interview,
Yeah.
Yeah, because we have a mutual friend, like my best friend is a really close friend of yours. And that's all I needed. And once I knew that, I'm like, oh, I would love to connect with Adam. So yeah.
Yeah, it's been a lot of years since I've been wanting to ask for your number to connect, because I think when we compare notes on our family stuff, it's going to be really awesome. We'll say that for another show sometime.
Right.
But sure. It's amazing. And so, yeah, what a great time and a way to meet you. And I do look forward to meeting you in person. And also thank you for being a supporter of our mutual friend and my business. And I love to be a supporter of what you're doing, and happy to spread this interview far and wide. And I think it'll change people's thinking for the better.
Well, no, I so appreciate that. And I just I'm really grateful to you too for your help with our mutual friend. So that just touches me really, really deeply. Yeah, I feel, even though this is the first time we're meeting, I feel, oh yeah, it's like meeting this brother, this spiritual brother.
Yes. Yeah. Very familiar. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Same here. Wow, Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Until the next one. Thank you, Paul Levy, incredible visionary author of the Undreaming Wetiko book, Breaking the Spell of the Nightmare Mind Virus. Definitely get it. It's on audio too. No excuse. You got to get it. All right. Big blessings. Aloha.